She didn't knock. Caitlin Barnes stormed into the study like she owned the oxygen in the room. Her hand was already trembling as she dropped the divorce papers and signed onto the edge of my father's old desk. Then, in one motion, she ripped them in half and let the pieces scatter like dead leaves across my lap. "You really think you're going to win this quietly?" she hissed. It was 9:46 p.m., a Thursday, the kind of silence that only comes after long hours of not speaking to each other, not even in passing. Her eyes were raw from whatever theater she'd just rehearsed in front of her lawyers. "My lawyers will tear you apart," she snapped. "Every penny you thought you hid, I'll find it." I didn't argue. I didn't move. "Okay," I said. That was it. No inflection. No panic. Just a man who already knew what she hadn't figured out yet. What Caitlin didn't know. The flash drives gone. The safe, emptied 3 days earlier. The files she'd shredded last week in a performative rage, all copies. The originals were sitting in a climate-controlled vault inside a law office 3 states away. Signed, time-stamped, and protected by privilege. She thought my silence meant surrender. She didn't realize it meant she'd already made her first and final mistake. She struck first. But I'd already finished the war. Caitlin didn't waste time. By Monday, she had retained Farswell and Green, one of those white-shoe legal firms with modern art on the walls and billable hours that would make a hedge fund blush. The ink hadn't dried on her complaint before they began what she called a financial excavation. Their phrase, not mine. They started with subpoenas, demanded bank records, pulled property deeds, crawled through 7 years of tax filings. Her team operated like a forensic unit. Offshore accounts, nominee trustees, holding structures. They were looking for blood. What they found was Windex. Everything gleamed. The accounts were clean, the statements unremarkable. Even my business investments, which Caitlin had once accused of being half-baked hobby projects, looked transparent to the point of suspicion. Almost too transparent. They didn't find the Cyprus account because it didn't exist anymore. It had been collapsed and reborn under a structured capital transfer 18 months ago, when I first started noticing Caitlin's tendency to come home smelling like someone else's cologne. They didn't find the Wyoming Trust either, because technically, I didn't own it. Cascade Holdings was managed by a fiduciary firm whose partners answered only to Delaware law. Every wire, every transfer, pre-cleared by compliance. On paper, I looked broke. A man clinging to residuals, alimony-bound, asset-light. Perfect prey. But prey doesn't usually leave bait. That same afternoon, quietly, methodically, I composed an email. No subject line. No pleasantries. Just a single spreadsheet. It was simple. 14 rows, each one tied to deposits made over the course of 6 years. But the pattern, once you saw it, was impossible to unsee. Each transaction was just under $10,000. Each came from the same entity, Barnes Family Wellness Foundation. Each bore a memo line. Consulting, S. Barnes. S. Barnes. Not Caitlin. Susan. Her mother. At the bottom of the email, I typed 6 words. Review activity tied to S. Barnes. Possible structuring. No signature. No context. Just a nudge in the right direction. Like leaving the back door open before the feds knock. Then I sent it to a man named Ezra Polk. Ezra didn't work in enforcement, at least not directly. He was buried inside the compliance unit of a federal regulator that handled charitable organizations and suspected tax anomalies. We'd met once at a corporate ethics roundtable years ago, bonded over bourbon and mutual disdain for shortcuts. I hadn't spoken to him since. But people like Ezra didn't need Christmas cards. They needed puzzles. And I had just handed him a Rubik's Cube soaked in gasoline. Caitlin, meanwhile, was busy staging her little crusade. Her lawyers filed emergency motions, froze minor accounts, threatened to depose my partners, my assistants, even my accountant. None of it landed. Every account they tried to tie to me came back with insufficient ownership proof. And still, she smiled. She thought she was winning. She saw my stillness as fear. She believed her financial subpoenas had me cornered. But she never asked where the foundation money had gone. Susan Barnes was a name buried in the bylaws of a shell entity created in 2014. It was Caitlin's idea, back when her PR firm was new and struggling, to build legitimacy. A family-backed philanthropic fund that supported wellness, mental health, and creative entrepreneurs. What she really meant was a way to funnel cash, untaxed, into projects she controlled. At first, it was harmless. She sponsored retreats, paid guest speakers, hired interns under the foundation's name. Then the deposits started looking rhythmic, structured, timed, all under the reporting threshold. The kind of thing that's legal until someone connects the dots. Ezra was good at dots. 3 days after I sent the file, I received a voicemail from Bruce, Caitlin's accountant. "They're here," he whispered, as if saying it louder might invite them into the room. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Two agents. Federal." They asked about Susan. Specifically, her signature on the 2018 filings. The Wellness Foundation. Something about inconsistencies. His voice cracked at the end, like he'd just realized which floor he was standing on when the elevator cable snapped. I said nothing. Caitlin's lawyers dropped her the next day. They cited a potential conflict of interest in their official statement. But what they really meant was, you brought a grenade to a knife fight, and it just went off in your own pocket. That night, Caitlin called me. Her voice was flat, measured. No venom this time. "You tipped them off." I didn't confirm, didn't deny, just waited. She laughed once, bitterly. "They're after her, Jack. My mother. She doesn't know what she signed." "She signed everything," I said. She didn't understand. "Did you?" Silence. It stretched. In the background, I heard her pour something. Ice clicked against glass. She was unraveling, but doing it quietly, like a woman trying to sip her way through a fire alarm. "You're not getting the house," she said finally. "I'll fight for that." "You should," I said. And I meant it. She needed something to fight for. Because the war she thought she was winning, it was already over. The house. It was the only thing left she still owned. It started with a whisper. 3 days after I forwarded the spreadsheet to Ezra, Caitlin's world began to shift, not with sirens or subpoenas, but with something far more dangerous: silence. She had just finished a client call, pacing around the upstairs landing like a war general rehearsing her next move, when Bruce called. Her accountant, the same man who once toasted her promotion with a bottle of overpriced champagne, who'd been her family's financial babysitter for over a decade. "They're here," he said. "Who?" she asked, distracted. "Two agents," Bruce replied, his voice dry, papery, like it had passed through a desert. He didn't give names, just mentioned suits, badges. One man, one woman. No rush, no panic, just questions. Professional, courteous, surgical. "They didn't ask about you," Bruce continued. "They asked about your mother. Specifically, her signature on the 2018 tax filings. For the Barnes Family Wellness Foundation." Caitlin stopped pacing. Silence, even in the background. You could feel the shape of the void. "She didn't handle any of that," Caitlin said. Bruce hesitated. "Well, her name's on the forms. Her signature's on the disbursement approvals." Caitlin gripped the banister. Her knuckles went pale. She didn't know what she was signing, she whispered. "They asked about that too," Bruce replied. A pause. Then came the blow she wasn't ready for. "They also asked if she was coached," he said. "On what to say? What to sign? What to declare?" Caitlin sat down on the top stair like her legs had suddenly remembered gravity. Her mother, Susan Barnes, was 72 years old. Thought she was helping. She thought a signature was just a favor, a parental nod, a small act of support. Not a rope. "Jesus," Caitlin muttered. Bruce didn't respond. There wasn't much to say when the noose was already halfway down the staircase. That night, her attorney resigned. Not by phone, not even by text. A formal letter arrived by courier. No explanation. Just a single paragraph citing conflicts of interest and the necessity of withdrawal to maintain ethical compliance. Translation: "You're radioactive." Then her brother called. His tone wasn't panicked. It was surgical. "Foundation accounts frozen," he said. "Regulators are asking for tax returns. 10 years worth." She tried to speak. He cut her off. "You need to fix this." "Not we. You." She hung up, stared at the glass in her hand like it might shatter just from being part of the same story. Meanwhile, I remained quiet. I didn't post online, didn't give interviews, didn't call her friends or warn her contacts. I let the silence expand, because real exposure doesn't need a microphone. It just needs a competent auditor and a timeline. Caitlin spent the next 48 hours on damage control. She called in favors, hired another attorney, this one less polished, more eager. She scoured her emails, looking for a thread she could pull to unwind the past. But the past doesn't unravel when it's been filed, time-stamped, notarized. Her new attorney asked one question. Is there anything your mother signed without full understanding of its legal implications? She hesitated, then answered honestly. Probably everything. That's when he paused. Then you have a problem, he said. The foundation's 2018 filings showed over $390,000 in consulting disbursements to individuals with no verified services rendered. One of those names? A now-defunct entity registered in Vermont under a P.O. box linked to her cousin's husband. That same entity showed donations to a wellness retreat in Sedona, where Caitlin had vacationed 3 times that year. The paper trail was neat, until someone actually read it. And the worst part? It was signed by Susan Barnes. Every page, every line. Her signature was clean, practiced. But the documents? Not hers. She'd merely been the vessel. The legal term was willful blindness. But if Ezra and his team could prove she'd been coached, coerced, even mildly manipulated, that line could shift into something worse: criminal negligence. Caitlin didn't sleep that night. She tried, took something, lay under the weighted blanket that once calmed her nerves. But the silence pressed in, thicker than sleep, more absolute than guilt. By morning, she looked different. Tired, yes, but something else. Smaller. She hadn't called me. Not once. Not after Bruce's warning. Not after her attorney fled. Not even after her brother sent her a final, one-line email. You're off the trust. Effective immediately. Instead, she called Susan. The call lasted 12 minutes. Susan cried twice. Caitlin didn't. She explained things slowly, deliberately. Told her mother not to answer any further calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Not to sign anything. Not to speak to anyone without legal counsel present. Susan asked one question. Am I in trouble? Caitlin said no. But she didn't believe it. She spent the afternoon going through storage boxes, looking for originals, retainers, any document that might create a buffer. But every file she opened led her deeper into the same loop. Susan had signed them all. Her name, her pen, her responsibility. At 7:02 p.m., Caitlin sat on the edge of the guest bed in her brother's empty lake house, staring out across the dark water. The phone was beside her, silent. What she didn't know was that Ezra had already looped in another department. The investigation was no longer civil. It was moving toward criminal audit. And I didn't call to gloat. I didn't send a message. I didn't even check the headlines. I was sitting in a quiet booth at a diner 2 states away, watching the waitress refill my coffee as I reviewed a document labeled Statement of Irrevocable Waiver, Barnes Wellness Foundation. At the bottom, a signature. Caitlin Barnes. Dated 3 years prior. She had no idea what she'd signed. But I did. And that silence? It was louder than any courtroom. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. Caitlin's life didn't explode, it dissolved. Slowly, painfully, like fabric left out in the rain too long, losing its shape thread by thread. It started with silence. Not mine. Hers. For a woman who'd once built an entire career around image, around crisis control, around carefully composed statements and rapid response, Caitlin went quiet. No social media. No press interviews. No curated shots of breakfast in Aspen or rooftop cocktails in Tribeca. Just static. Her PR firm, Barnes Collective, ran on reputation. The boutique clientele, the influencer partnerships, the hush-hush damage control contracts for politicians and CEOs, all of it required trust, discretion, impeccable optics. But optics don't survive subpoenas. 3 weeks after Bruce's call, one of her oldest clients, an organic skincare line out of Santa Monica, quietly terminated their retainer. No explanation, just a form letter from legal, thanking her for the years of strategic partnership. Caitlin tried to call them. No answer. 3 days later, a second client dropped. Then a third. It took only 10 business days for Barnes Collective to go from boutique powerhouse to ghost brand. Her assistant quit. Her junior strategist updated her LinkedIn. Caitlin still tried to work. Showed up to the office in tailored black and oversized sunglasses. But the receptionist no longer looked her in the eye. And the silence in the halls wasn't respect, it was retreat. By the second Monday of the month, the board of directors, made up of former colleagues, silent partners, and 2 of Caitlin's college friends, voted to suspend operations, pending regulatory clarity. Translation, you're the liability now. She stayed seated in that boardroom for a full 2 minutes after the vote. No one spoke. No one met her gaze. The same people who used to toast her wins at rooftop parties now stared down at notepads, waiting for her to leave. When she finally stood, her chair let out a soft squeal against the polished floor, louder than any goodbye. Her sister texted that night, "Fix this or don't come to Thanksgiving." No emoji, no warmth. Her brother, the trust fund one with the weekend house in Montauk, sent a PDF via DocuSign. A formal removal of Caitlin Barnes as trustee of the Barnes Family Wealth Management Trust. No call, just a timestamp. She signed it. There was no fight left. And me? I did nothing. Didn't reply. Didn't comment. Didn't so much as blink in her direction. I simply moved on. I rented a cabin 2 states away. No forwarding address. No announcements. Just a quiet relocation. A mortgage-free place tucked in the hills, surrounded by trees, wind, and the kind of quiet you only appreciate after years of being talked over. The local bank manager smiled when I walked in and opened a new account. Small town. No questions. She asked what I did for a living. Compliance, I said. Mostly cleanup work. That much was true. I kept the news alerts on for a few weeks. Not to gloat, just to monitor. The Wall Street Journal ran a 2-sentence blurb about the Barnes Foundation being under preliminary review for structural inconsistencies in filings between 2018 and 2021. It didn't even make the main page. But for Caitlin, it might as well have been a death certificate. Clients don't wait for a court ruling. They wait for headlines. And her name had finally landed in one. Back in Dallas, Bruce's firm had gone quiet. No public statements, no denials. Just a brief notice on their website that they had concluded all professional engagements with Ms. Barnes. I knew what that meant. They were covering themselves. And I knew what came next. The only conversation I had during that stretch was with Ezra. One call. 10 minutes. No notes. He thanked me for the spreadsheet. Told me that while he couldn't disclose details, he appreciated the clarity of the submission. That was all I needed. The system didn't need a villain. Just a trail. And Caitlin had paved hers in platinum. The last time I heard her voice was a voicemail. Short. Breathless. Unstable. "You used my mother," she said, barely above a whisper. "You weaponized her." I didn't call back. She was wrong. I didn't use Susan. She did. She had asked Susan to sign the filings. Told her they were just paperwork. Played the role of the successful daughter, bringing her family into the business. And Susan, faithful, aging, unaware, had signed her name beneath numbers she didn't understand. Now that name was tied to a potential federal indictment. Not because I'd falsified anything, but because I'd noticed. I'd prepared. I'd waited. The last thread came undone one quiet Tuesday morning when Caitlin returned to the firm to collect a few personal items. A security guard escorted her to her office. The glass door still bore her initials, CB. Inside, the desk had been cleared. Even the plants were gone. Her nameplate sat alone on the table, like a tombstone without a grave. She picked it up, turned it over once, then set it back down. That afternoon, she tried calling Bruce again. He didn't answer. Tried texting her brother. No reply. Tried emailing one of her former board members. The message bounced. She was no longer Caitlin Barnes, founder and CEO. She was just Caitlin Barnes, name on a closed file. Somewhere in that same hour, I sat on the cabin porch, fresh coffee in hand, reading a new book. No music. No noise. Just the sound of wind against trees and a mind finally at rest. The war was over. She just hadn't realized it yet. She showed up uninvited. It was late, somewhere between 9 o'clock and 9:30, when the light turns thick and gold just before the mountains disappear into ink. I was on the porch, stirring the last of my coffee, when I saw her car crawl up the gravel path like it wasn't sure it belonged there. She stepped out slower than I expected. No heels. No makeup. No weapons, at least none I could see. Her eyes were swollen, not from tears, but from exhaustion. The kind that creeps up after weeks of bracing for a blow that finally lands. I didn't move. She climbed the steps, hesitated at the top, then, almost casually, let herself in through the screen door. Like we were still married. Like there was still a we to walk into. I heard her walk through the cabin, past the wood stove, over the creaking pine floors, all the way to the kitchen. The clink of glass, the faucet running. When she finally found me again, I was at the table, spoon paused midair over a bowl of reheated stew. I want to talk, she said. I gestured toward the other chair. She sat, still holding the glass. Didn't drink from it. Just gripped it like it was proof she still had something solid in her hands. You used my mother, she said flatly. I didn't answer. You fed her those forms. You set her up. No, I said quietly. You did. Her jaw tightened. But she didn't deny it. She couldn't. Somewhere under all that collapse, she knew. You used her to legitimize the foundation, I continued. You asked her to sign because you thought it made the filings cleaner. A family face on the cover page. She trusted me, she said. She didn't understand what she was signing. Caitlin blinked. That's not a defense, I said. That's negligence. She didn't do anything wrong, she snapped. She just signed where I told her. I nodded slowly. Let it sink. That's what they're looking at now, I said. Intent. Influence. How much guidance she got from you. Whether she was a knowing participant or a signature with a heartbeat. Caitlin leaned forward, voice shaking. She has early cognitive decline. I didn't know at the time. But now you want to use it, I finished. She froze. Swallowed hard. I didn't set her up, she said. I was just trying to run the business. You think I wanted this to happen? No, I said. I think you thought you were untouchable. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was hollow, like a building gutted by fire. Still standing, but nothing left inside. She's not strong enough for this, Caitlin whispered. You don't know what it's like to watch your mother fade. I nodded once. You're right. I don't. She looked down. The condensation on her glass had pooled under her hand. Why didn't you just fight me in court? She asked suddenly. You had the lawyers. The documents. You could have torn me apart. I didn't want to fight, I said. She scoffed. Bull. I wanted clarity, I corrected. I wanted to make sure I didn't become a version of myself I wouldn't recognize in 5 years. She said nothing, just stared. Everything I did, I said calmly, was to protect myself from the version of you that stood in front of me with a matchbook and a smile. She looked away, out the window, toward nothing. A full minute passed. I lost everything, she said quietly. No, I said. You still have one thing. She turned back. Regret. That landed. She didn't flinch, but her breath caught slightly, as if her own lungs had betrayed her. We sat like that for a while. Two people who used to know each other, separated by legal filings and the unsaid. She stood eventually, walked to the door. At the threshold, she stopped. You could have ruined me, she said. Publicly. You could have gone scorched earth. I stood too, walked to the window. I didn't need to, I said. You were holding the match. She didn't respond, didn't look back, just opened the door, stepped into the night, and drove away. No parting shot, no apology, just absence and silence. 5 days after she screamed, "You'll lose in court," she sat at a polished walnut table, surrounded by silence, cheap coffee, and the faint echo of what used to be power. The conference room was neutral by design. Soft gray carpet, a frosted glass wall looking out over a view of a bank across the street. It didn't need drama. The table itself was enough, a battlefield with no blood, just documents. Pens, legal pads, a pitcher of water that no one touched. Caitlin arrived 10 minutes early, not because she was prepared, but because she didn't know what else to do. Her hair was tied back with the kind of haste that comes from too little sleep. Her blazer was designer, but ill-fitted, like she'd lost 5 pounds she couldn't afford. No makeup, just exhaustion. I arrived 5 minutes later, escorted by my attorney, an older man who spoke only when it mattered. He didn't say a word when he opened his briefcase, just laid out the packet, page by page. Caitlin watched, but didn't interrupt. On the 3rd page of the agreement, she stopped reading. "This is brutal," she whispered. Her lawyer didn't look up. No claims, no access, no support. The financial disclosures were final. Assets had been separated, with every trace of her wellness consulting ring-fenced and declared untouchable. The accounts she thought were hers, the ones she'd used to sponsor yoga retreats and wine-laced workshops, had been legally severed from any marital entitlement. The house. Sold. Proceeds already placed in a structured escrow. Caitlin reached for the pen, paused, then laughed. Dry? Short. "You really couldn't let me win one thing," she said, barely above a whisper. I stayed quiet. "You said you didn't want revenge," she added. "I didn't," I replied calmly. "This isn't revenge. It's consequence." Her attorney cleared his throat, nudged the pen toward her. She signed. No flourish. No hesitation. Just a line. A mark. A quiet surrender. Then I slid the final page toward her. She blinked. What's this? Waiver of future claims, my attorney said. Standard closure clause. No appeals. No renegotiation. No reopeners. Caitlin stared at it, and I could see the realization in her eyes. The moment she understood that this was the last door. And once she signed it, there were no more calls, no more lawyers, no more lifelines. She looked at me. This is it then? I nodded. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't even blink hard. She signed, then pushed the page toward the center of the table and leaned back. There were no final words, no righteous declarations, just silence. When it was done, I stood, shook hands with my attorney, and gathered my coat. Caitlin remained seated, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. The coffee in front of her had gone cold. She didn't look up. I didn't offer a goodbye. As I stepped out into the hallway, I passed the receptionist. She gave a polite smile. Probably didn't know who was who in the story. Didn't matter. The elevator doors opened. I didn't look back. That morning, the phone buzzed again. Not mine, Bruce's. He answered before the second ring. I don't know if he expected it, but he sounded tired, worn down by the gravity of things no one wanted to put in writing. They're back, he said softly. And this time, they asked if your mother had been coached before filing her 2021 taxes. Caitlin didn't respond immediately. Coached, she repeated. Yeah, Bruce said. They're asking if she was guided. If someone pre-filled forms. If she knew what she was signing. Silence. Then, what did you tell them? Nothing, Bruce said. Not yet. But I can't lie to them, Caitlin. If she didn't understand those documents, and you helped her sign them, that's not just paperwork anymore. That's criminal negligence. Caitlin hung up. No protest. No argument. Just a soft click, and then nothing. She stood in her kitchen, phone still in her hand, the screen fading to black. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Thin flakes, barely visible at first, brushing against the window like they didn't want to be noticed. Across the state, I stood on a mountain porch, coffee in one hand, a federal memo in the other. No headlines. No satisfaction. Just a quiet confirmation. The system had noticed. No screaming. No fire. No ruined car or court fight. Just process. Precision. She'd thrown the first punch and assumed I'd never strike back. But I never needed to win. I just needed her to lose. And in the end, some revenge is loud. But the most dangerous? It's whispering.